For over a decade, a shadow fell across California, a faceless predator who crept into homes in the dead of night, leaving a trail of terror and heartbreak. He was known by many names: the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. But his most enduring name, the one that encapsulates the sheer scope of his reign, is the Golden State Killer. This is the story of how decades of fear and frustration finally gave way to a revolutionary breakthrough that would change forensic science forever and bring a monster to justice. It began in the mid-1970s in the quiet suburban neighborhoods of Northern California. A series of burglaries at first, but these weren't simple smash and grabs. The intruder would linger, meticulously going through personal belongings, sometimes eating food from the fridge. It was unsettling, a violation that felt deeply personal. Soon, these invasions escalated. The burglar began to attack, binding and assaulting his victims, often with their own family members helpless in another room. He was brazen, methodical, and utterly terrifying. He would whisper threats, his voice low and menacing. He seemed to know their routines, their homes' layouts. The sense of safety in these communities was shattered. Who was this man, and how was he always one step ahead? As the 70s wore on, the attacks grew more frequent and more violent. He moved south, his hunting ground expanding down the California coast. The pattern was chillingly similar. He targeted couples in single-story homes, striking late at night. The psychological torment was as much a part of his method as the physical violence. He would tie up the man and place dishes on his back, warning that if he heard them rattle, he would kill the woman. The fear he instilled was paralyzing. Law enforcement agencies were overwhelmed. In an era before centralized databases and instant communication, connecting crimes across different counties was a monumental task. Detectives from Sacramento, Contra Costa, and Orange County were all chasing the same ghost, but for a long time, they didn't even realize it. They were dealing with a phantom who left behind few clues and a community gripped by panic. The pressure was immense, but the killer remained elusive, a whisper in the dark. Then, in 1979, the unthinkable happened. The attacks turned deadly. The East Area Rapist became the original Night Stalker. For the next 7 years, he would add murder to his list of horrific crimes. The attacks were brutal, and the fear across Southern California became palpable. People bought guns, installed new locks, and slept in shifts. But he was like a force of nature, striking without warning and then vanishing. By 1986, the attacks suddenly stopped. Just like that, the Golden State Killer disappeared. Years turned into decades. The case went cold, but it was never forgotten. For the survivors, the trauma was a life sentence. For the investigators who had dedicated their careers to the case, it was a haunting failure. They had a profile, they had witness accounts, but they had no name. They did, however, have one crucial thing, preserved carefully in evidence lockers: the killer's DNA. In the early 2000s, DNA technology offered a glimmer of hope. Investigators were finally able to confirm that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were, in fact, the same person. This was a huge step, linking dozens of crimes to a single perpetrator, but it was still a dead end. The killer's DNA profile didn't match anyone in the existing criminal databases. The case stalled again, a painful reminder of justice just out of reach. Yet a new generation of investigators, like Paul Holes, refused to let it go. They lived with the case files, poring over every detail, hoping for a break. That break would come from an unexpected place: the booming industry of consumer genetic genealogy. Companies were helping people build family trees using their DNA. What if, investigators wondered, they could use the same technique to find the killer's relatives? It was a long shot, a novel and controversial idea, but with every other avenue exhausted, it was the only one left. In 2017, investigators uploaded the killer's DNA profile to a public genealogy website. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was something even more powerful. It was a match to a distant relative, a great-great-great-grandparent. Using this tiny thread, genealogist Barbara Ray Venter began the painstaking work of building out a massive family tree, working backward and then forward through generations. She was looking for a man of a certain age who would have been in the right places at the right times. After months of tireless genealogical detective work, tracing hundreds of relatives, she narrowed the possibilities down to 2 men. One of them was a 72-year-old former police officer living a quiet life in a Vive, Sacramento suburb, Joseph James DeAngelo. Investigators began surveillance. It seemed impossible. Could this elderly man, who lived with his daughter and granddaughter, be the monster they had been hunting for 4 decades? They needed his DNA to be sure. They collected a sample from his car door handle, and then a second one from a tissue he'd discarded in a trash can. The samples were rushed to the lab. The results came back. It was a perfect match. On April 24, 2018, nearly 44 years after his first known crime, police descended on Joseph DeAngelo's home. The phantom who had terrorized the state for over a decade was finally caught. The news sent shockwaves around the world. The man who had lived a double life, a cop, a Navy veteran, a father, was the Golden State Killer. In 2020, to avoid the death penalty and spare his victims a lengthy trial, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and admitted to dozens of uncharged rapes and burglaries. In a courtroom filled with survivors and the families of his victims, he was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would die in prison. The capture of the Golden State Killer was more than just the closing of a cold case. It was a landmark moment in criminal justice. It demonstrated the incredible power of genetic genealogy, a tool that has since helped solve hundreds of other cold cases. But more importantly, it finally brought a measure of peace to the countless people whose lives he had shattered. Their resilience, their refusal to be silenced, kept the memory of these crimes alive until technology could finally catch up with justice. The story of the Golden State Killer is a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. But it is also a powerful testament to the unwavering dedication of law enforcement and the quiet strength of survivors who never gave up hope. It teaches us that even after decades of silence, the truth can find its way into the light.